The coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago, but Maya Rodriguez kept sipping it anyway. Her fingers moved across the console with practiced ease, monitoring 7 different emergency frequency channels simultaneously. 22 years she'd been doing this job at the Regional Emergency Communications Center, and she'd never seen anything like what started happening 6 weeks ago. "Another one coming through on Channel 7, called out her supervisor, Derek Williams, from across the room. His voice carried that edge it had developed lately, the sound of someone trying to stay professional while everything around them crumbled. Maya adjusted her headset and pulled up the transmission log. The automated emergency alert system kicked in right on schedule, broadcasting the same message that had been repeating across 3 states for the past month and a half. "This is an emergency broadcast. Severe weather conditions reported in sectors 4 through 18. Residents are advised to remain indoors and await further instructions. Do not attempt travel. This message will repeat." She'd heard it so many times she could recite it word for word. But what bothered her wasn't the message itself. It was everything else. Maya pulled up her personal monitoring equipment, the gear she'd started bringing from home after the weird patterns began. The official channels showed clear skies across all the affected sectors. No storm systems, no severe weather warnings from the National Weather Service. Nothing that would justify the constant evacuation orders that had been broadcasting for weeks. "Derek," she called out, swiveling her chair to face him. "I'm seeing the meteorological data again. There's no storm system anywhere near Sector 12, but we're broadcasting severe weather warnings." Derek looked up from his paperwork, his expression tight. "Maya, we've been through this. The alerts come from federal level. We just relay them. But they don't match reality. I've got 3 different weather monitoring systems here and—" "Drop it." Derek's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Federal protocols supersede local observation. That's the chain of command." Maya turned back to her console, but something cold settled in her stomach. Derek had never talked to her like that before. In 22 years, he'd been supportive, encouraging her to question inconsistencies and double-check data. Now he acted like questioning anything was borderline treason. She waited until Derek stepped out for his smoke break, then pulled up the transmission logs from the past 6 weeks. The emergency broadcasts had started on March 15th, a Tuesday she remembered clearly, because it was her daughter Sophia's birthday. The first few days, the alerts made sense. Real storm systems moving through the region, flooding warnings that matched actual rain patterns. But somewhere around March 22nd, things changed. Maya pulled up archived weather data on her personal laptop, cross-referencing it with the emergency broadcasts. On March 22nd at 3:17 p.m., the automated system started issuing severe weather warnings for areas experiencing perfect sunshine. By March 25th, the pattern was clear. Emergency broadcasts were being sent for weather events that didn't exist. What made it worse was how specific the alerts were getting. Instead of general warnings, they now included precise instructions: which roads to avoid, which buildings to evacuate, even specific times when residents should turn off their phones and radios. The most recent alerts had started including medical advisories, warnings about contaminated water supplies that health departments hadn't issued, recommendations for medications that didn't exist. Maya scrolled through the data, her coffee cup forgotten. The emergency broadcast system was being hijacked, but by whom? And why were officials like Derek acting like everything was normal? Her computer chimed with an incoming message. Maya glanced at the sender, an encrypted address she didn't recognize. She hesitated for a moment, then opened it. "You're not crazy. The broadcasts are fake. If you want to know why, meet me at Riverside Park, bench number 7, tonight at 9 p.m. Come alone. Trust no one at your office." A friend. Maya stared at the message, her pulse quickening. Someone else had noticed. Someone else was asking the same questions. She deleted the message and checked the time. Derek would be back from his break soon. Maya gathered her personal monitoring equipment and shoved it into her bag, trying to look casual. "I'm taking my lunch break," she called out when Derek returned, not waiting for his response. Maya drove to her apartment in silence, her mind racing. 6 weeks of fake emergency broadcasts, supervisors acting strange, and now anonymous messages. She needed to think, to piece together what was really happening. At home, she spread her weather monitoring printouts across her kitchen table and opened her laptop. Maya had been tracking patterns in the broadcasts, noting which areas were being evacuated and when. She pulled up a map of the region and started marking the affected zones. The pattern that emerged made her stomach drop. Every area that had received evacuation orders was either near critical infrastructure or housed sensitive government facilities. Sector 4 contained the Regional Power Grid Control Center. Sector 7 housed a pharmaceutical research facility. Sector 12 was home to the state's primary data storage center for governmental records. Maya grabbed a red pen and circled each facility on her map. The emergency broadcasts weren't random. They were systematically clearing people away from specific locations. But why? She spent the next hour researching each facility, digging through public records and news archives. The pharmaceutical plant in Sector 7 had been working on advanced medical research for the past 3 years. The data center in Sector 12 stored everything from voter registration records to state employee databases. The power grid facility controlled electricity for half the state. Maya leaned back in her chair, pieces clicking together in her mind. Someone was using fake emergency broadcasts to clear areas around sensitive facilities. But the question remained, who and what were they doing once the areas were empty? She glanced at the clock. 7:30 p.m. In an hour and a half, she'd meet whoever sent that message. Maya knew it was dangerous. Meeting a stranger based on an anonymous email was exactly the kind of thing that got people killed in horror movies. But she needed answers. Maya spent the next hour making copies of all her research, storing backup files in 3 different locations. If something happened to her, at least there would be evidence. At 8:45 p.m., she drove to Riverside Park. The place was almost empty, just a few joggers finishing their evening runs and an elderly man walking his dog. Maya parked near the entrance and walked slowly toward bench number 7, her eyes scanning for anything suspicious. A woman was already sitting there, probably in her mid-40s, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. She looked ordinary, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second glance. When Maya approached, the woman looked up. "Maya Rodriguez?" she asked quietly. "Yes. Who are you?" "My name is Janet Hotz. I worked for the Federal Emergency Management Agency." Janet gestured for Maya to sit down. "I've been monitoring your office's communications for the past 2 weeks." Maya sat down cautiously. "Why?" "Because someone's been using our emergency broadcast protocols to run unauthorized operations, and we think your facility is one of the relay points." Janet pulled out a tablet and showed Maya a screen full of data. "These broadcasts aren't coming from FEMA. They're not coming from any legitimate government agency. Someone has access to our systems, and they're using them to coordinate something big." "Coordinate what?" Janet looked around the park, then leaned closer. "We don't know yet, but every facility that's been evacuated has been visited by unmarked vehicles during the emergency broadcasts. Teams go in while everyone's gone. They do something inside. Then they leave. The areas get declared safe a few hours later and people are allowed back." Maya felt pieces clicking together. How many facilities? 47 across 6 states. Power grids, data centers, research labs, water treatment plants. All critical infrastructure. Janet swiped to a new screen on her tablet. "Here's what's really scary. Some of these facilities handle things that could affect millions of people. Water supplies, electrical grids, medical research databases. So, what do? We figure out who's behind it and stop them before they hit their real target." Janet showed Maya another screen, this one displaying a map with red dots marking affected facilities. "Look at the pattern. They're working their way towards something specific. All the hits so far have been practice runs or preparation for something bigger. Maya studied the map, tracing the progression of red dots. What's their target? We think it's the National Emergency Alert System headquarters in Washington. If they can get physical access to that facility, they could send emergency broadcasts to every phone, television, and radio in the country simultaneously. Janet's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Imagine what would happen if they could convince everyone in America to evacuate their homes at the same time, or take specific medications, or ignore real emergency warnings. The magnitude of it hit Maya like a physical blow. When? Based on the pattern, we think they're planning to hit NEAS headquarters in the next 2 weeks. But first, they need to take control of a few more regional facilities to coordinate the operation. Janet pointed to Maya's location on the map. Your communications center is next. Maya's mouth went dry. Derek, my supervisor, he's been acting strange, defensive about the broadcasts, telling people not to question them. He might be compromised, or he might just be following orders from someone higher up who's compromised. Janet closed her tablet. Either way, we need to document what happens at your facility during the next fake emergency broadcast. If we can catch them in the act, we might be able to trace the operation back to its source. When's the next broadcast? Janet checked her watch. According to the pattern we've mapped, tomorrow night, probably around 11 p.m., when your facility is running minimal staff. Maya's pulse quickened. What do you want me to do? Can you stay late tomorrow without raising suspicion? I can volunteer for overtime. We're always short-staffed on the night shift. Good. When the fake broadcast starts, I need you to document everything. Who issues the orders, what procedures they follow, any unusual activity in or around the building. Janet handed Maya a small device that looked like a USB drive. This will record everything on your computer systems. Just plug it in when the broadcast starts. Maya took the device, turning it over in her hands. What if they catch me? Then we're both in serious trouble. Janet stood up. But if we don't stop this, millions of people could be in danger. These aren't random attacks. They're building towards something that could paralyze the entire country. After Janet left, Maya sat on the bench for another 20 minutes, watching the sun set over the park. Tomorrow night, she'd find out who was really behind the emergency broadcasts. The thought terrified her, but the alternative, letting whoever was responsible continue their plan, was worse. Maya drove home through quiet streets, past houses where families were having dinner and kids were doing homework. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that their emergency alert system had been turned into a weapon against them. She spent the evening preparing. Maya charged her phone, gathered her monitoring equipment, and made sure her personal laptop was ready to record whatever happened tomorrow night. She also wrote a detailed account of everything she'd learned and left it in a sealed envelope with her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, with instructions to give it to the police if Maya didn't return by Friday morning. The next day at work passed slowly. Derek was more tense than usual, checking his phone constantly and making several hushed phone calls. Maya tried to act normal, but every interaction felt loaded with hidden meaning. At 6 p.m., as the day shift prepared to leave, Maya approached Derek. "I'd like to stay for overtime tonight," she said. "The Johnson account needs those transmission logs updated, and I could use the extra money." Derek looked at her for a long moment. "You sure?" "It's going to be a quiet night." "I'm sure." "All right, just lock up when you leave." By 8 p.m., the communications center was nearly empty. Only Maya and 2 night shift operators remained, monitoring routine channels. Maya set up her equipment at her regular station and waited. At 10:47 p.m., Derek returned to the office. Maya looked up in surprise. "I thought you went home," she said. "Forgot some paperwork." Derek's smile looked forced. "You should probably wrap up soon. System maintenance is scheduled for tonight. What kind of maintenance? Routine updates, nothing major. Maya nodded and turned back to her console, but every nerve in her body was on high alert. Derek had never mentioned system maintenance before, and he'd never returned to the office after leaving for the day. At 11:03 p.m., Maya's console chimed with an incoming federal priority message. She opened it and felt her blood chill. Emergency broadcast authorization Alpha 779. Severe chemical leak detected in sectors 15 through 23. Immediate evacuation required. All residents must leave the area within 30 minutes. Do not use private vehicles. Proceed to designated assembly points on foot. This is not a drill. Maya quickly checked her weather monitoring systems and environmental sensors. No chemical leaks detected anywhere in the region. The air quality readings were normal, and there were no industrial facilities in those sectors that could produce the kind of leak described in the alert. She glanced around the office. Derek was at his station, typing rapidly. The two night shift operators were initiating the broadcast sequence, their faces focused and professional. Maya plugged in Janet's recording device and began documenting everything. She captured the false environmental data in the broadcast, noted the specific evacuation procedures, and recorded the precise timing of the alert. But as she worked, Maya noticed something that made her stomach turn. The evacuation zones in tonight's broadcast included her own neighborhood. According to the alert, her street was in the middle of a deadly chemical leak zone. Her phone buzzed with an automated emergency message. Mandatory evacuation in progress. Leave area immediately. Maya looked up to find Derek watching her. You should probably head home and evacuate, he said. The alert covers your area. I'll finish up here first, Maya replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Derek's expression hardened. Maya, that's a direct federal emergency order. You need to evacuate now. I'm staying to monitor the situation. Derek stood up and walked over to her station. That wasn't a request. Maya's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. Derek, we both know there's no chemical leak. I've been monitoring environmental sensors all night. For a moment, Derek's mask slipped, and Maya saw something in his eyes that chilled her to the bone. It wasn't anger or confusion. It was calculation. You need to leave, now. Maya saved her files and slowly stood up. Fine, I'll evacuate. She gathered her personal equipment and headed for the exit, but stopped when she heard Derek pick up his phone. She's asking questions, Derek said quietly. Yeah, she's been monitoring too closely. We might need to accelerate the timeline. Maya slipped out of the building and ran to her car, her mind racing. Derek wasn't just following orders, he was part of whatever was happening. And according to his phone call, they were planning to speed up their operation because of her investigation. Maya drove toward her neighborhood, but instead of evacuating, she parked 3 blocks away and walked back toward her street. If Janet was right about teams visiting facilities during fake emergencies, Maya wanted to see who showed up in her area. She positioned herself behind a row of bushes near the community center and waited. At 11:45 p.m., 3 unmarked white vans drove slowly down her street. They stopped at the neighborhood's water treatment substation, a small facility that supplied drinking water to nearly 50,000 people in the surrounding area. Maya watched as teams of people in hazmat suits got out of the vans and entered the water facility. They worked quickly and efficiently, like they'd done this many times before. After about 20 minutes, they loaded equipment back into their vans and drove away. Maya waited another 10 minutes, then approached the water facility. The building looked normal from the outside, but when she peered through a window, she could see that several pipes had been opened and some kind of equipment had been attached to the main water lines. She pulled out her phone and took pictures, documenting everything she could see. Whatever the teams had installed, it was connected directly to the water supply that served her entire neighborhood. Maya's hands shook as she drove home. The fake emergency broadcasts weren't just clearing areas for random attacks on infrastructure. They were being used to install something in the water supply, the power grid, and data systems that controlled people's lives. Tomorrow, she'd contact Janet and turn over everything she'd recorded. But tonight, Maya had to live with the knowledge that whatever had been installed in her neighborhood's water system would affect every person she cared about. As she pulled into her driveway, Maya noticed that most of her neighbors had evacuated as instructed. The street was eerily quiet, with only a few porch lights left on. She looked up at her daughter Sophia's bedroom window and realized that the emergency broadcasts weren't just fake warnings. They were a weapon designed to make people abandon the very infrastructure that kept them safe. And tomorrow night, according to the pattern Janet had shown her, the attacks would continue. Maya barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the hazmat teams installing equipment in her neighborhood's water system. By 6 a.m., she gave up trying to rest and made coffee with bottled water, afraid to trust anything coming from her taps. She spent the morning researching water treatment facilities and trying to understand what kind of equipment could be quickly installed in a water supply system. The possibilities were all terrifying. Chemical dispensers, biological agents, monitoring devices that could track water usage and determine when people were home. At 10 a.m., Maya called Janet from a payphone outside a grocery store 3 miles from her house. "I recorded everything," Maya said when Janet answered. "They installed equipment in my neighborhood's water treatment facility. Teams in hazmat suits working like they'd done it 100 times before." "Good work. Can you meet me at the same place as yesterday? We need to analyze what you recorded." "Janet, they know I'm asking questions. My supervisor made a phone call about accelerating their timeline." There was a pause. "That's not good. We might have less time than we thought." Maya met Janet at Riverside Park an hour later. This time, Janet had brought a laptop and several technical devices Maya didn't recognize. "Show me everything you recorded," Janet said. Maya handed over the USB device and her phone with the photos from the water facility. Janet plugged the drive into her laptop and began scrolling through the data. "This is incredible," Janet said after several minutes. "You captured the exact protocols they're using. Look at this. The equipment installation follows a specific sequence, and the timing matches installations at other facilities across the country." "What kind of equipment is it?" Janet pulled up a technical diagram on her screen. "Based on these images, it looks like some kind of automated dispensing system. But here's what's strange. The chemical signatures we're detecting aren't toxic. They're actually medical compounds." Maya stared at the screen. "Medical compounds?" "Specifically, they appear to be cognitive enhancers and neurological stabilizers. Drugs that would make people calmer, more focused, less likely to panic." Janet looked up from her laptop. "Maya, what if this isn't an attack? What if whoever's doing this thinks they're protecting people?" The possibility hit Maya like a slap. Protecting them from what? That's what we need to figure out. And I think the answer is at your communications center. Janet closed her laptop. "I've been monitoring federal emergency channels, and there's chatter about a major incident planned for tonight. Something that requires maximum population stability during the response." Maya felt cold despite the warm afternoon sun. What kind of incident? "I don't know, but based on the communications I've intercepted, it's something that would normally cause mass panic, the kind of event where people's first instinct would be to flee or fight, which would make everything worse." They sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications. "Janet," Maya said slowly, "what if the fake emergency broadcasts aren't the real plan? What if they're just preparation for a real emergency that's coming?" Janet nodded grimly. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Someone knows something terrible is about to happen, and they're using the emergency broadcast system to prepare the population without telling them what they're preparing for. But why not just warn people directly? Because sometimes the truth causes more damage than ignorance. Think about it. If you knew a catastrophic event was coming but couldn't prevent it, would you want people to spend their last normal day in panic? Or would you rather give them medication to keep them calm and rational when it actually happens? Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from Derek. Need you to come in early tonight. Special federal coordination exercise. Report by 7 p.m. She showed the message to Janet. This is it, Janet said. Tonight's when whatever they've been preparing for actually happens. I need you to get me inside that communications center. How? Can you bring a guest? Someone helping with the federal exercise? Maya thought about it. Maybe. If I say you're a federal liaison or something. Perfect. I'll create credentials that should pass a basic check. Janet stood up. Maya, I need you to understand something. After tonight, either we'll have answers and can stop this, or we'll be in serious danger from people who think they're saving the world by controlling it. Maya drove home and spent the afternoon preparing. She packed emergency supplies in her car, left detailed instructions with Mrs. Patterson about contacting the authorities if she disappeared, and called her daughter Sophia at college. Mom, you sound weird, Sophia said. Is everything okay? I'm fine, sweetheart. I just wanted to hear your voice. Are you sure? You sound scared. Maya closed her eyes. Sophia, if anything happens to me, I want you to know that everything I did was to protect people, including you. Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on? Nothing, baby. I love you. After hanging up, Maya sat in her kitchen and stared at the bottle of water on her counter. Somewhere in her neighborhood's water supply, equipment was waiting to dispense drugs that would keep people calm during whatever was coming tonight. The thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting. At 6:30 p.m., Maya picked up Janet outside the park. Janet was wearing a professional-looking blazer and carried a briefcase that contained whatever federal credentials she'd created. Remember, Janet said as they drove toward the communications center, tonight, we're just observing. We document everything, but we don't interfere unless lives are in immediate danger. What if Derek suspects something? Then we improvise. Maya's hands were sweating as she pulled into the parking lot of the Regional Emergency Communications Center. The building looked normal from the outside, but she noticed more cars than usual for an evening shift. Inside, the main operations room was buzzing with activity. Maya recognized some faces from the day shift who shouldn't have been there, plus several people she'd never seen before wearing federal ID badges. Derek approached them as soon as they walked in. Maya, good timing. Who's your companion? Janet Patterson, Federal Emergency Management Agency. She's here to observe our coordination protocols for the exercise tonight. Maya hoped her voice sounded normal. Derek examined Janet's credentials, which apparently passed inspection. Welcome, Agent Patterson. We're honored to have federal oversight. Janet nodded professionally. I'm here to ensure communication protocols meet federal standards during emergency simulations. Excellent. Maya, Agent Patterson, please take stations at Console Bank 3. Tonight's exercise begins at 8 p.m. sharp. Maya and Janet set up at the designated consoles. Maya noticed that several of the unfamiliar faces were positioned at key control stations, while regular employees like herself were relegated to observation posts. At 7:45 p.m., Derek addressed the room. Tonight, we're conducting a large-scale emergency communication exercise. Federal authorities have designed a scenario to test our response capabilities during a major incident. All personnel are to follow protocols exactly as directed. No deviations, no questions, no personal communications during the exercise. Maya felt Janet tense beside her. At exactly 8 p.m., alarms began sounding throughout the building. Not the usual practice alarms, but the serious tones reserved for actual emergencies. Derek's voice came over the intercom. All stations, we have a confirmed meteor impact in the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 200 miles east of the Virginia coast. Massive tsunami waves are projected to reach the eastern seaboard within 6 hours. This is not an exercise. Repeat, this is not an exercise. Maya's blood ran cold. She looked at Janet, who was already pulling up data on her tablet. Maya, Janet whispered, this isn't showing up on any federal emergency systems. There's no meteor impact, no tsunami warning from NOAA, nothing. but the people around them were responding as if the emergency was real. Emergency broadcasts began transmitting across all channels, warning coastal populations to evacuate immediately to designated inland shelters. All residents within 50 miles of the coast must evacuate within 4 hours, Derek announced. Transportation will be provided to federal emergency shelters. Do not attempt to drive personal vehicles. Report to designated assembly points for organized evacuation. Maya watched in horror as millions of people across multiple states received emergency alerts telling them to abandon their homes and report to government shelters. The scope was staggering. This wasn't a test or a limited operation. This was a coordinated effort to relocate a significant portion of the East Coast population. "Janet," Maya whispered, "they're evacuating millions of people based on a lie." "I know, but why?" Maya accessed her monitoring systems and began tracking the evacuation orders. The pattern was becoming clear. Every major city, military installation, and critical infrastructure facility along the eastern seaboard was being systematically emptied. At 9:30 p.m., Maya's console received a priority message from federal authorities. Phase 2 authorized. Begin medical compliance protocols. Derek's voice filled the room again. Due to potential contamination from meteor impact debris, all evacuees will receive prophylactic medical treatment at evacuation centers. This treatment is mandatory and has been pre-approved by federal health authorities. Maya's stomach dropped. The equipment in water treatment facilities, the cognitive enhancers Janet had identified, it was all connected. They weren't just evacuating people. They were planning to medicate them at the shelters. "Janet," Maya whispered urgently, "I think I know what's really happening." But when Maya turned to Janet's station, it was empty. Janet was gone. Maya looked around the operations room frantically. Janet was nowhere to be seen, and Derek was walking directly toward Maya's console. "Ms. Rodriguez," Derek said, his voice carrying that calculated tone she'd heard on the phone the night before. "I need you to come with me." "Where's Agent Patterson?" "Agent Patterson is attending to federal business. You're needed for a special assignment." Maya's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. "What kind of assignment?" "Follow me." Derek led Maya down a corridor she'd never seen before, past security doors that required keycard access. They entered a small conference room where 3 people in federal suits were waiting. "Ms. Rodriguez," one of them said, "please have a seat." Maya remained standing. "Where's Janet?" "There is no Agent Janet Patterson in the Federal Emergency Management Agency," the man said. "The woman you've been meeting with is Dr. Janet Richardson, a former CDC researcher who was dismissed from government service 3 years ago for attempting to expose classified operations." The room seemed to tilt around Maya. "What operations?" "Dr. Richardson has been interfering with a critical national security exercise designed to test our capacity to manage population displacement during catastrophic events." "The meteor impact is a simulation, yes, but the threats we're preparing for are very real." The man opened a folder and showed Maya satellite images. These photos were taken by military reconnaissance satellites over the past 6 months. "Do you see anything unusual?" Maya stared at the images. They showed what appeared to be massive structures rising from the ocean floor in multiple locations around the globe. "What am I looking at?" "We don't know. These structures appeared simultaneously in 12 locations worldwide 6 months ago. They're growing larger each week, and they're emitting energy signatures unlike anything we've seen before." Maya felt dizzy. "You're saying there's actually a threat?" "We're saying there's something in our oceans that doesn't belong there, and we have no idea what it is or what it plans to do. But we do know that when these structures reach a certain size, which our calculations suggest will happen within the next 72 hours, they're going to emerge from the water." The federal agent showed Maya more photos. The structures were enormous, each one the size of a small city, and they were clearly artificial. The cognitive enhancers, the evacuation procedures, the emergency broadcasts, everything you've been investigating is part of a plan to manage civilian populations when these things reveal themselves. Because when that happens, traditional emergency management won't be enough. Maya sank into a chair. So the water treatment facilities contain medications designed to prevent mass panic when people see these structures emerge. The evacuation centers have been equipped with everything necessary to house and care for millions of people for extended periods. And the emergency broadcast systems have been prepared to provide coordinated information that will keep people alive instead of sending them into chaos. Why not just tell people the truth? Because the truth is that we don't know if these things are weapons, transportation devices, or something else entirely. We don't know if they're controlled by hostile intelligence or if they're completely automated. We don't even know if they're aware of us. The agent closed the folder. What we do know is that revealing giant artificial structures in our oceans without preparation would cause societal collapse before we could determine if they're actually dangerous. Maya's mind reeled. Where's Janet, Dr. Richardson? In federal custody. She's been trying to stop our preparations because she believes people have a right to know what's coming, regardless of the consequences. Derek spoke for the first time since entering the room. Maya, we need your help. Your communication center is critical to maintaining coordinated information flow when these structures emerge. We need someone with your experience and knowledge of the local systems. What if I refuse? Then millions of people will be less prepared for whatever happens next. And Dr. Richardson will face federal charges for interfering with national security operations. Maya looked around the room at the faces staring at her. These people genuinely believed they were protecting the country from something unprecedented and potentially catastrophic. But they were doing it by drugging water supplies and lying to the entire population. How long do we have? Based on current growth rates, the structures will breach the surface in approximately 60 hours. Maya made her decision. I'll help, but I want to see Dr. Richardson first. The federal agents exchanged glances. That can be arranged. They brought Maya to a secure holding area in the basement of the communications center, a part of the building she'd never known existed. Dr. Richardson was sitting in a small room that looked more like a conference room than a jail cell. Maya? Janet said when Maya entered. Did they tell you? About the structures in the ocean? Yes? Did they show you the energy readings? Maya shook her head. Janet pulled out a tablet. Apparently, they'd allowed her to keep some of her research materials. The structures aren't just growing, Maya. They're communicating. With each other, and with something outside our solar system. Maya stared at the data on Janet's screen. You're saying they're not human? I'm saying they're definitely not human, and they're part of something much larger than what's happening on Earth. Janet swiped to another screen showing radio telescope data. These energy signatures started appearing from deep space around the same time the ocean structures became active. Whatever's in our oceans is talking to something very far away. So why are you trying to stop the government's preparations? Because they're preparing for the wrong thing. Janet's voice was urgent. They're treating this like a military threat or a natural disaster, but the communication patterns suggest something completely different. What? The structures aren't weapons or invasion devices. They're construction equipment. Something is building infrastructure in our oceans, and the communication patterns suggest they're asking permission. Maya felt the world shift around her again. Permission for what? That's what we need to find out. But we can't do it if the government keeps the entire population sedated and controlled. Janet gripped Maya's arm. Maya, what if these beings are trying to help us? What if they've been watching us destroy our planet, and they want to provide better technology? The energy signatures from the structures are consistent with clean fusion power sources that could solve our climate crisis overnight. But the government thinks they're dangerous. The government thinks everything unknown is dangerous. They're so focused on controlling the situation that they can't see the possibility that this might be the best thing that's ever happened to humanity. Maya paced the small room, trying to process everything. Even if you're right, what can we do? The evacuation is already happening and those structures are going to surface in 2 days, whether we're ready or not. We can make sure people are awake and aware when it happens. We can give them the choice to think for themselves instead of being drugged into compliance. How? Janet smiled for the first time since Maya had met her. By using the same emergency broadcast system they've been using to control information. We're going to tell people the truth. Maya stared at her. That's treason. No, Janet said quietly. That's democracy. Maya spent the next hour learning Janet's plan. It was audacious, dangerous, and probably insane. But it was also the only way to give people the information they needed to make their own decisions about what was coming. When the federal agents returned, Maya had made her choice. I'll help with your communications coordination, Maya told them. But I want Dr. Richardson released to assist with technical operations. Her expertise will be valuable. The lead agent considered this. Under supervision. Agreed. What the agents didn't know was that Maya and Janet had developed a plan to use the government's own emergency broadcast infrastructure to transmit the real data about the ocean structures directly to the population. Over the next 24 hours, as millions of people reported to evacuation centers and received prophylactic medical treatment, Maya and Janet worked within the communications center to prepare their counter-broadcast. They couldn't stop the evacuation. It was too far along. But they could make sure people knew what they were really facing when those structures emerged from the ocean. At 6 p.m. on the day the structures were projected to surface, Maya initiated the most important broadcast of her career. This is an emergency override message. In approximately 6 hours, 12 large artificial structures will emerge from oceans around the world. These structures have been growing beneath the surface for 6 months and appear to be controlled by non-human intelligence. Maya's voice carried to every phone, television, and radio in the affected regions. The evacuation you have experienced was designed to protect you during this emergence. However, the medications you may have received at evacuation centers were intended to limit your emotional response to what you're about to see. Derek and the federal agents were running toward Maya's console, but Janet had locked down the transmission controls. Current data suggests these structures are not weapons, but construction and communication devices. Energy signatures indicate clean fusion technology that could revolutionize human civilization. The beings responsible appear to be attempting peaceful contact. Security personnel reached Maya's station and began trying to shut down the transmission, but Janet had routed it through backup systems across multiple states. You have the right to know what's happening to your world. In 4 hours, humanity will make contact with an intelligence from outside our solar system. Stay calm, stay aware, and remember that fear is often just a lack of understanding. The transmission ended as security personnel finally disabled the broadcast equipment. Maya and Janet were immediately detained, but they'd accomplished what they set out to do. Millions of people now knew the truth. At 11:47 p.m., exactly as projected, 12 massive structures breached the surface of oceans around the globe. They rose slowly, like cities emerging from the depths, their surfaces covered in patterns of light that pulsed in complex rhythms. Maya and Janet watched from a secure viewing room as the first structure fully emerged off the Virginia coast. It was beautiful. A crystalline spire that reached nearly half a mile into the sky, surrounded by smaller towers that hummed with energy. Look at the water around it, Janet said. Maya stared. The ocean surrounding the structure was changing color, becoming clearer and more vibrant. Fish that had been absent from those waters for decades were returning in massive schools. It's cleaning the ocean, Maya whispered. Across the globe, similar scenes played out as each structure emerged. Instead of attacking or invading, they began what appeared to be environmental restoration on a massive scale. ocean temperatures stabilized, pollution levels dropped, and marine ecosystems began recovering at an unprecedented rate. The communication attempts began 3 hours after emergence. Mathematical sequences, prime numbers, and then increasingly complex patterns that suggested advanced intelligence. The messages were peaceful, patient, and clearly designed to establish dialogue rather than dominance. Maya and Janet were released the following morning. The federal agents who had detained them looked exhausted and somewhat embarrassed. "It appears," the lead agent said, "that Dr. Richardson's assessment was more accurate than our worst-case scenario planning." "So what happens now?" Maya asked. "Now we learn. The structures are clearly trying to help rather than harm, and the beings controlling them seem willing to work with us rather than subjugate us. Your broadcast may have prevented the kind of mass panic that could have turned a first contact situation into a disaster." Maya drove home through a world that had changed overnight. The emergency broadcasts were now carrying real information about the structures and the ongoing attempts at communication. The cognitive enhancers had worn off for most people, but instead of the predicted chaos, there was a sense of cautious optimism. Her neighborhood looked the same, but Maya knew everything was different. The water from her taps was cleaner than it had been in years. Apparently, the structures were connected to underground systems that were purifying groundwater across entire continents. Maya's phone rang. It was Sophia, calling from college. "Mom, I saw your broadcast. Was that really you?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Are you in trouble?" Maya looked out her window at the clear blue sky. In the distance, she could see the top of the Virginia structure, its lights pulsing in patterns that scientists were already beginning to decode. "No," Maya said. "I think we're all going to be just fine." 3 months later, Maya was promoted to Director of Interplanetary Communications Coordination, a job title that would have been science fiction 6 months earlier. The structures had established permanent communication links with what appeared to be a vast network of civilizations throughout the galaxy, and humanity had been invited to join as junior partners in a cosmic community focused on environmental restoration and sustainable development. Janet became the lead scientific liaison, coordinating research projects between human scientists and the artificial intelligences that operated the ocean structures. The beings themselves remained physically distant, communicating only through their constructs, but their intentions became clear through actions. They were gardeners, nurturing life throughout the universe. The emergency broadcast system Maya had once monitored for weather alerts now carried daily updates on technological innovations, environmental restoration projects, and cultural exchange programs with other worlds. The fake emergency broadcast that had started everything turned out to be practice for something far more important: managing humanity's transition from an isolated world to a participating member of a galactic civilization. Maya often thought about the night she'd first noticed the discrepancies in the weather alerts. If she hadn't questioned those broadcasts, if she hadn't investigated the patterns, if she hadn't met Janet and learned the truth, humanity's first contact with an alien civilization might have been shaped entirely by fear instead of hope. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to trust the voices telling you not to ask questions, even when those voices claim to be protecting you.